Goodbye.
Sponsors were rewriting ad copy on the fly, trying to chase her heat, because ratings don't wait. Gracie Allen wasn't just playing a part, she was a goldmine. But behind that facade lay a lie about her life that Hollywood protected for decades. To keep you smiling, a sharp, vulnerable woman had to lock herself inside the dumb girl persona. While the cameras rolled, she masked the pain. And we're going to tell you exactly why long sleeves became her uniform. She gave her life for your laugh. It's time to learn the cost. These wounds didn't appear out of thin air. They stemmed from a childhood Gracie rarely spoke of because it was drenched in the fear of being erased. Her father, a song and dance man, walked out when she was just 5. That betrayal didn't just break the home, it carved a brutal lesson into a little girl. Love has to be earned, and survival depends entirely on how useful you are. Instead of playing with dolls, she got the stage. She was in front of crowds at 3, and by 14, she was grinding it out on the vaudeville circuit, sleeping on freezing trains, and performing in damp, moldy halls. But the system demanded its first payment in blood even earlier. A horrific scalding accident left her left arm badly scarred from shoulder to elbow. The doctors wanted to amputate, but she pulled through. From that day on, long sleeves were her uniform. She learned to move so no one would spot that her arm couldn't fully straighten. She concealed that physical damage just as skillfully as she'd later hide her internal torment. When she met George Burns, she was ready to throw in the towel and become a secretary, tired of being a nobody on the billing. But fate played a cruel joke. Originally, she was supposed to be the straight woman, and George the comic. The crowd had other ideas. They roared at her innocent questions, at her illogical logic. They gave her the success she dreamed of, but the price tag was steep. To stay on top, a smart, sensitive woman had to lock herself permanently inside that dumb girl act. She thought she found salvation in the audience's laughter. She didn't realize the machine had just slammed the door of a golden cage behind her. The real villain here wasn't some fat cat producer chewing on a cigar. The killer was the role itself, a monster Gracie created that started slowly, methodically eating her alive. Her executioner was the insatiable roar of the millions, demanding dumb Gracie every single night, with no days off. The torture didn't come from a whip, it came from stacks of scripts piled as high as a skyscraper. Every week, she was handed dozens of pages of dialogue completely void of human logic. Think about that pressure. She had to memorize this verbal chaos verbatim. Miss a beat, drop a comma, and the timing is dead. The joke fails. It took the discipline of a brain surgeon, but the public was sold the lie that she was just a natural-born ditz. The suits knew the truth. Backstage, Gracie was well-read, deep, and razor-sharp. But they weaponized her own intelligence against her, forcing her to weld that mask to her face until she couldn't take it off. They monetized every confused breath she took. The psychological warfare peaked in 1933. Radio decided to blur the line between the show and reality. They launched a stunt hunting for her missing brother. They made Gracie crash other broadcasts, interrupting serious shows to ask about a brother who didn't exist. America lost its mind. People couldn't tell the difference between the actress and the lunatic anymore. The studios turned her life into a national sideshow, stripping away her right to be a normal human being even when the mic was off. The point of no return hit in 1950. The jump to television was a death sentence. Radio was a shield. She could hide her shaking hands and read off the page. But the TV camera? That was a gun barrel pointed right at her face. The red on-air light caught everything. The panic in her eyes, the lines of stress, the chest pains she tried to bury. She couldn't just use her voice anymore. She had to physically live the lie in front of the lens, micromanaging every muscle. The moment that camera red lighted for the first time, the woman named Grace Ethel vanished. All that was left was a wind-up doll for the mob to gawk at. The first hit came from her own body, snapping under a rhythm no human being was meant to survive. While the audience howled at Gracie mixing up hats, off-camera she was popping handfuls of pills for migraines that had hunted her since she was a kid. The discipline was brutal. Once, after smashing her nose in a taxi crash, she was back in front of the camera the very next day, knocking out 3 shows back to back. The studio didn't do sick days. The studio demanded airtime, and the makeup was plastered right over the bruises. But the second hit was psychological warfare. The industry decided to erase the line between her job and her private life, turning her existence into an endless loop of déjà vu. The set for the TV show was built as an exact, creeping replica of their real home at 720 North Maple Drive. The studio went so far as to haul the actual furniture and paintings out of their living room and dump them onto the soundstage. Think about that nightmare. Gracie would leave her house in the morning, drive to the lot, walk onto the set, and find herself right back in her living room. There was nowhere for the role to end and the life to begin. They turned her sanctuary into a workspace. The cameras hunted her even in the illusion of her own home, stripping away any right to feel safe anywhere. The third hit was the terror of becoming obsolete. Gracie was so petrified that the industry would spit out her real, aging, fragile self that she started erasing her own timeline. In interviews, she turned her age into a gag, blaming missing records on an earthquake. She shaved nearly a decade off her life, and for a long time, even her tombstone carried a lie, 1902 instead of 1895. That wasn't just starlet vanity. That was a panic move by a woman trying to defend herself against a world that scraps actresses the second they show a wrinkle. She was killing her past to buy a little more future on stage. The final hit caught her in the late 1950s. Angina was crushing her chest so hard that every breath was a battle, and the nitroglycerin pills stopped working. For years, she begged George, "I want to quit." She dreamed of it quietly, in whispers, but the ratings were too high. The contracts and the obligations squeezed her failing heart dry until 1958, when the risk of dropping dead right in front of the lens, in the fake scenery of her own home, became a terrifying reality. She didn't retire. She escaped just to stay alive. Many call her exit in 1958 the tragic end of a great era. That is the biggest lie show business ever told. The day Gracie Allen stood on that set, said, "Okay, that's enough, thanks everyone," and walked out the door forever, that was her biggest victory. She didn't just retire, she executed a prison break. Behind the closed gates of her Beverly Hills mansion, she finally found peace. For the first time in 30 years, there were no stacks of scripts. No red camera light tracking her every move like a sniper's scope. Silence finally settled over her garden. Gracie pruned her roses, went to morning mass, and played cards with the girls. George loved to crack wise about what a terrible card player she was, claiming she lost constantly. But for Gracie, that was paradise. The freedom to make a mistake without the ratings taking a hit. But even in that sanctuary, the old ghosts hunted her. She was terrified of being shipped off to a nursing home, dumped in a strange place away from her family. That fear was the echo of the 5-year-old girl whose father walked out on her. There are some wounds the system can't fix, no matter how much money you throw at them. When she died in 1964, the news didn't just sadden Hollywood, it gutted it. At the funeral in the old church, George Burns, the man who was her rock on stage, finally crumbled. He was shaking so bad that Jack Benny had to physically hold him up to keep him from hitting the floor. For the first time in his life, he had nobody to lean on. And even there, at the edge of the open grave, one last argument broke out. How old was she? The papers were guessing, 58, 62. But George gave her one final gift. On her marker, he carved the date 1902, the lie Gracie had used for protection. He let her keep playing the part even in eternity, guarding her secret until his own death. It wasn't until years later, when they were finally reunited under the same stone, that the truth of 1895 was chiseled back in. Gracie Allen invented the language of modern comedy. Lucille Ball, the sitcoms you grew up on, Stand Up, they're all standing on the foundation built by a fragile woman with a burned arm and a spine of steel. But looking at her story today, you need to ask yourself a hard question. Right now, as you scroll your feed and watch the next big TikTok or YouTube star laughing and doing crazy stunts for your likes, who are you really looking at? A happy person? Or just another Gracie, burning herself alive just so you don't change the channel? Sometimes the loudest laugh hides the deepest silence, and maybe it's time to stop laughing and start listening.